Billionaire humiliated a black janitor, then froze when he saved the entire company. Take your filthy hands off that machine. The command cracked across the operations floor with enough force to silence 200 people. Mops stopped moving. Keyboards went still. Even the ventilation system seemed to lower its mechanical breath. At the center of the vast glass-walled control room stood Marcus Reed, a 52-year-old black janitor in a faded gray uniform. One hand rested beside an open server cabinet. The other held a small flashlight between fingers scarred by years of electrical work no one in that building knew he understood. 10 feet away, Billionaire CEO Richard Whitmore stared at him as if he had caught a thief breaking into a vault. "You clean floors," Richard said. "You do not touch equipment worth more than your entire bloodline will ever earn." A few executives looked down. Others smiled. Marcus slowly removed his hand from the cabinet. "I was only trying to warn you, sir." Security. 2 guards stepped forward. Marcus did not resist when they took him by the arms. He did not argue when Richard fired him in front of the entire company. He did not tell the laughing executives that the faint burning smell drifting through the room was not coming from a cleaning chemical. He only looked once at the wall of monitors. Every screen showed green. But Marcus knew green lights could lie. 3 days later, those same monitors turned black. The company's payment network collapsed. Billions of dollars vanished into frozen transactions. Hospitals lost access to emergency purchasing accounts. Small businesses could not release payroll. Federal regulators called every 6 minutes. And the billionaire who had humiliated Marcus Reed stood inside a darkened control room, holding a dead phone in his trembling hand. There was only one person left who understood what was happening. The man he had thrown out. The man no one had listened to. The janitor. But the story had begun long before the screens went dark. It began on a Monday morning beneath the soft yellow lights of Whitmore Global's 42-story headquarters in Chicago. Marcus arrived at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes before his shift. The city outside was still half asleep. Rain pressed against the glass doors in silver lines, and buses groaned along the wet avenue. Inside, the marble lobby reflected every light so perfectly that the ceiling seemed to continue beneath the floor. Marcus removed his worn coat, shook the rain from the shoulders, and hung it in the basement locker room. His uniform had been washed so many times that the fabric around the knees had thinned to the color of smoke. He buttoned it carefully. Then he opened the small metal locker beside his. Inside was a paper bag containing a turkey sandwich, an apple, and a handwritten note. "Don't forget your appointment on Thursday. Love you, Dad." The note was from his daughter, Lena. At 22, Lena attended nursing school during the day and worked evenings at a pharmacy. She and Marcus lived together in a narrow apartment above a laundromat on the south side. The radiators knocked all winter. The kitchen window would not close completely, but the rent was low enough for Marcus to help with tuition. He folded the note and placed it in his wallet beside an old photograph of his late wife. Then he picked up his cart. By 5:10 a.m., Marcus was cleaning the executive elevators. He worked quietly, always beginning at the top floor and moving down before employees arrived. He knew which conference rooms needed extra coffee cups, which executives left food beneath their desks, and which managers spoke kindly only when someone important was watching. He also knew the building's sounds. The elevators had a soft metallic shutter before stopping at the 36th floor. The ventilation duct above the legal department rattled on windy mornings. The backup generator made a low, uneven hum whenever the air temperature fell below freezing. Marcus noticed sounds because he had spent most of his life listening to machines. Before becoming a janitor, he had worked for 23 years as an industrial electrical technician. His hands had once repaired control panels at water treatment facilities, train stations, and manufacturing plants. He had studied electrical engineering at a community college at night, one class at a time. He had been 6 credits from completing his degree when his wife, Evelyn, was diagnosed with cancer. The hospital bills grew faster than his savings. He left school. Then he left his technical job because Evelyn needed constant care. After she died, Marcus tried to return to the industry. But technology had changed, certifications had expired, and employers preferred younger men with newer credentials. Whitmore Global was the first place that offered him steady work. So Marcus cleaned floors. He never complained. He polished the surfaces around machines he could understand better than the executives who owned them. That Monday, as he pushed his cart onto the 38th floor, He heard a sound that did not belong. A high, thin whine. It lasted less than 2 seconds. Marcus stopped. The 38th floor housed the company's network operations center, a secure room filled with servers, monitoring terminals, and climate control systems. Whitmore Global processed international payments for banks, hospitals, airlines, and government contractors. Every minute, enormous amounts of money passed invisibly through the systems behind those glass walls. Marcus stood still and listened. The sound came again, a faint electrical cry beneath the hum of cooling fans. He moved closer to the wall. Through the glass, rows of black server cabinets blinked beneath blue-white lights. A night technician sat with his feet on a desk, watching a video on his phone. Marcus knocked. The technician lowered one earbud. "What? Are you getting any warnings from the power units?" The technician looked at Marcus's cart, then at the mop in his hand. "No, I heard coil whine near the secondary distribution line." The technician laughed once. "You heard what?" "The backup power system. It may be carrying an uneven load." "Everything's green." Marcus glanced at the monitors. Green bars. Green symbols. Green lines moving across dark screens. Green only means the sensors think it's normal. The technician leaned back. "And the mop means you're supposed to be somewhere else." Marcus held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. "All right." He continued down the hall. Behind him, the technician returned to his phone. At 8:30 a.m., the building filled with expensive shoes and urgent voices. Richard Whitmore arrived through the private entrance in a black limousine. He was 61, tall, silver-haired, and famous for turning a small financial software company into a global empire worth $19 billion. Business magazines called him relentless. Former employees used other words. Richard believed fear created discipline. He believed kindness invited weakness. He believed everyone in the world could be divided into two groups, those who built power and those who served it. His suits were tailored in London. His watches cost more than most homes. His office occupied the entire eastern corner of the top floor, where the windows framed the city beneath him like property. That morning, he entered the lobby with 6 executives behind him. Marcus was kneeling near the revolving doors, cleaning rainwater that had been tracked across the marble. Richard did not slow down. One of his shoes landed directly in the wet section Marcus had just polished, leaving a dark print. Marcus reached for the warning sign. Richard stopped. "You missed a spot." Marcus looked at the footprint. "Yes, sir." Richard turned to the executives beside him. "This is what happens when people stop taking pride in basic work." A young vice president smiled nervously. Marcus rose, picked up his cloth, and wiped away the mark. Richard watched him. "You've worked here how long?" "For years." "And you still need me to point out dirt?" Marcus straightened. "No, sir." Richard glanced at Marcus's name badge. "Then perhaps, Mr. Reed, you should focus on what you're qualified to see." The executives followed him toward the elevators. Their shoes clicked across the marble like small hammers. Marcus remained beside the door. He watched Richard's reflection disappear into the polished metal. Then he returned to work. At noon, Marcus ate his sandwich in the basement maintenance room beside his co-worker, Luis Ortega. Luis was 64 and had spent half his life repairing plumbing in office buildings. He had a gentle laugh and hands permanently stained by rust. "You look like you're thinking too hard," Luis said. Marcus turned the apple in his palm. "I heard something in the network center." Luis raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something?" "Electrical resonance. High frequency. Could be a transformer winding or a damaged power conditioner." "And did you tell them?" Marcus gave him a look. Luis sighed. "Of course you did." They laughed. They always laugh before something breaks. Marcus bit into the apple. "It isn't funny. That room runs the company." Luis lowered his voice. "Then put it in writing." Marcus looked toward the closed door. "I'm a janitor. You're also the only janitor I know who reads technical manuals on his lunch break." Marcus did not smile. Luis leaned closer. "Write it down. Keep a copy." That afternoon, Marcus found an unused incident report form. He described the sound, location, and approximate frequency. He noted the intermittent heat near the secondary power cabinet and recommended an infrared inspection of the distribution system. He signed his name. Then he delivered the report to Trevor Kane, Director of Infrastructure. Trevor was 40, sharp-faced and restless, with a habit of checking his watch while other people spoke. He had been promoted 3 months earlier after promising Richard a 30% reduction in operating costs. He took the report between two fingers. What is this? A safety concern on 38. Trevor skimmed the first sentence. Did someone authorize you to inspect equipment? No. I heard the sound while cleaning. Trevor's eyes moved to Marcus's uniform. You heard a sound. Yes. And from that, you've diagnosed a power distribution failure? I didn't diagnose it. I recommended an inspection. Trevor dropped the report onto his desk. Do you know how many monitoring systems we have? I know monitoring systems can miss physical degradation. Trevor's expression changed. Not surprise. Annoyance. You seem to know a great deal for someone assigned to sanitation. Marcus felt the familiar heat rising beneath his collar. He kept his voice calm. I worked in industrial electrical systems for 23 years. Then perhaps you should have stayed there. My wife became ill. Trevor checked his watch. I'm not interested in your life story. Marcus looked down at the report. Please have someone check the cabinet. Trevor folded the paper once, then twice. You're done here. Marcus stepped into the hallway. Behind him, he heard the soft tear of paper. The next morning, the whine was louder. Marcus heard it before he even opened the operations floor doors. This time, there was another smell. Hot insulation. Faint, bitter, and almost sweet. He walked to the glass wall and looked inside. A red-haired engineer named Rachel Kim was checking overnight logs. Unlike the technician from the previous morning, she did not laugh when Marcus knocked. She opened the door. What's wrong? Can you check the secondary power cabinet? Why? Marcus pointed toward the back wall. Something is overheating. Rachel studied him. You can smell that through the door? I can hear it. She hesitated, then followed him toward the cabinet. The metal door was warm. Not hot enough to trigger the surface sensor, but warm enough. Rachel frowned and pulled up the cabinet data on her tablet. Temperature says normal. Check phase balance. She tapped through several menus. Her expression tightened. One line is fluctuating. How much? 2%. Maybe 3. Check the raw feed, not the filtered report. Rachel looked at him. How do you know our reporting system filters transients? Because the screen refreshes every 5 seconds. A shorter spike won't show. She stared at the janitor beside her as if seeing him for the first time. Then she opened a diagnostic panel. The raw data appeared. A sharp current spike rose and fell every 11 seconds. Rachel's face changed. That shouldn't be happening. No, she immediately called Trevor. He arrived 10 minutes later with 2 technicians. When he saw Marcus standing near the cabinet, his jaw hardened. What is he doing in here? He noticed the fluctuation, Rachel said. I asked what he is doing in here. Marcus stepped back. Rachel held up the tablet. Trevor, the secondary feed is spiking. Within tolerance. Technically. Then it's not a problem. It could indicate insulation breakdown. Trevor exhaled through his nose. We have the quarterly investor presentation tomorrow. Richard is bringing the board through this room. I am not shutting down a live processing system because a janitor heard a noise. Marcus looked directly at him. You don't need to shut down the whole system. Transfer the load. Inspect the bus connections. Trevor took one step closer. You are not part of this department. The cabinet is getting hotter. We have sensors. The sensors are mounted above the damaged section. The technicians exchanged glances. Trevor noticed. His voice became colder. Mr. Reed, return to your assigned duties. Marcus did not move. Someone could get hurt. Trevor smiled without warmth. Your concern has been noted. It had not been noted. By noon, Trevor had written Marcus up for entering a restricted technical area without authorization. By evening, the disciplinary notice was waiting in his locker. Marcus read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his bag. At home, Lena was sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by anatomy flashcards. The apartment smelled of tomato soup and laundry detergent from the business downstairs. Rain ticked against the loose window. She looked up when Marcus entered. You're late. Had paperwork. What kind? He set his bag beneath the chair. Nothing important. Lena studied his face. You do that thing with your jaw when something is important. Marcus removed his shoes. What thing? That thing you're doing right now. He smiled faintly. She pushed a bowl of soup toward him. What happened? Marcus sat. For a moment, he considered telling her everything. Instead, he said, They think I don't know what I'm talking about. Lena leaned back. Do you? Yes. Then why does it matter what they think? Because they own the building. That doesn't make them right. Marcus looked at his daughter. She had Evelyn's eyes. Clear, steady, and unwilling to look away from pain. They can fire me, he said. Lena's expression softened. We'll survive. Your tuition will survive. Marcus lowered his eyes to the soup. Steam rose between them. Lena reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Mom didn't love you because of your job title. He swallowed. I know. She loved you because when everyone else panicked, you stayed calm. Marcus looked toward the old photograph on the refrigerator. Evelyn stood in sunlight, laughing with one hand raised against the camera. He remembered hospital alarms at 2 in the morning. He remembered learning which sounds meant discomfort and which meant danger. He remembered the final week, when her voice had weakened to almost nothing. Do not let this world make you smaller, she had whispered. Marcus had promised. The next day, Whitmore Global hosted its annual investor event. Camera crews filled the lobby. Champagne stood on silver trays. Giant screens displayed rising graphs and phrases such as resilience, trust, and the future of finance. Marcus and the cleaning team had been instructed to remain invisible. By 9 o'clock, the operations floor was crowded with board members, investors, and senior executives. Richard stood before the main display, speaking about the company's reliability. Our infrastructure does not merely support global commerce, he said. It protects it. Marcus was cleaning fingerprints from the glass doors outside. The electrical whine had become a pulse. High, low, high again. His skin tightened. He set down the cloth. Inside the cabinet, something clicked. Not a relay. A tiny arc. Marcus opened the door to the operations room. Rachel saw him first. What is it? You need to transfer the load now. Trevor turned from the investors. Not today. There's arcing inside the cabinet. Richard stopped speaking. Every face turned. Trevor walked quickly toward Marcus. You were ordered to stay out. The connection is failing. Richard's expression sharpened. Who is this? Trevor lowered his voice. Maintenance employee. He has been causing problems. I'm trying to stop one, Marcus said. Richard looked at him. The billionaire's eyes moved from Marcus's worn uniform to his cleaning gloves. You interrupted my presentation to discuss a sound? The secondary power distribution is overheating. Several investors glanced toward the cabinet. Trevor forced a laugh. Our systems are fully monitored. Marcus pointed to the diagnostic screen. The reporting software is averaging the spikes. You're not seeing the real load. Richard stared at him. And you understand our infrastructure? I understand electricity. A few people smiled. One board member whispered something to another. Richard stepped closer. What is your position here? Night sanitation. The room changed. The tension broke into quiet amusement. Richard looked around as if inviting everyone to appreciate the absurdity. Then he faced Marcus again. You are a janitor. Yes. And you believe you understand this company's systems better than engineers we pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. I believe a burned connection doesn't care what anyone is paid. The smiles vanished. Trevor's face turned pale with anger. Richard's voice dropped. Be very careful. Marcus looked past him at the cabinet. The smell was stronger now. Sir, shut the circuit down. Richard laughed once. It was a hard, humorless sound. You people always do this. Marcus's eyes returned to him. What people? The room became still. Richard seemed to realize he had stepped near an edge. But pride pushed him forward. People who mistake access for authority. You mop the floor near our machines and suddenly imagine you belong in the conversation. Marcus did not answer. Richard gestured toward the equipment. Do you know what that system is worth? Yes. No, you don't. I know what happens if it fails. Richard moved close enough that Marcus could smell his expensive cologne. Take your filthy hands off that machine. The words landed harder than the laughter. Marcus slowly lowered his flashlight. I was only trying to warn you, sir. Richard turned toward security. Remove him. Rachel stepped forward. Mr. Whitmore, I did see irregularities. Richard did not look at her. Did you authorize this man to enter? No. But then we are finished. The guards reached Marcus. He allowed them to take his arms. Trevor picked up the disciplinary record from a nearby desk. This is his second violation. Richard glanced at it. You're fired. Marcus looked directly at him. Not with anger. Not with fear. With sadness. The smell will get stronger before the system fails, he said. When it does, don't restart the backup array automatically. Trevor shook his head. Get him out. Listen to me, Marcus continued. If the control bus shorts, automatic restart will bridge the damaged lines. It could corrupt the synchronization layer. Richard's expression hardened. You are no longer employed here. The guards led Marcus toward the door. People moved aside. Some avoided his eyes. Others watched with the quiet fascination reserved for accidents. As Marcus passed the glass wall, he saw his reflection, gray uniform, old shoes, shoulders held straight. Behind that reflection stood Richard Whitmore beneath the giant word trust. The elevator doors closed. Marcus left the building carrying his belongings in a cardboard box. It had begun to rain again. He crossed the plaza without opening his umbrella. Water darkened his uniform. Traffic lights blurred red and gold across the wet street. A bus hissed to a stop, but Marcus did not board it. He sat instead beneath the awning of a closed cafe. Inside the box were 2 work gloves, Evelyn's photograph, a screwdriver set, his lunch container, and a small plant Louise had given him the previous Christmas. One leaf had broken during the walk. Marcus touched it gently. His phone rang. It was Lena. He watched her name glow on the screen. Then he answered. Hey, baby. You're calling me baby, so something happened. Marcus looked out at the rain. They let me go. Silence. Then Lena asked, Did you do something wrong? I entered a restricted room. Why? To stop a failure. Were you right? Marcus listened to the buses, the tires cutting through water, the low thunder rolling between buildings. Yes. Then come home. His throat tightened. That's all. That's enough. Marcus closed his eyes. For 10 seconds, he let himself feel the weight of everything he had lost. The paycheck, the health insurance, the small dignity of predictable work. Then he picked up the box. Before leaving the awning, he noticed a man sleeping beside the cafe entrance beneath a plastic sheet. Marcus reached into his wallet. He had $43. He left 10 beneath the man's dry shoe. Then he walked toward the train. If this moment touched your heart, remember Marcus did not prove his strength by shouting louder than the people who humiliated him. He showed it by refusing to let their cruelty decide who he would become. Back at Whitmore Global, the investor event continued. Trevor ordered the cabinet doors closed. He told Rachel to remove the raw data panel from the main display. Why? She asked. Because it is distracting the investors. The spikes are getting worse. Trevor looked around to make sure no one could hear. Do you understand what happens if we shut down during Richard's presentation? Do you understand what happens if the cabinet fails? It won't. You don't know that. Trevor stepped closer. I know this company is cutting $12 million from infrastructure costs this quarter. I know Richard approved my promotion because I promised no disruptions. And I know I'm not explaining a shutdown to the board because a fired janitor made you nervous. Rachel stared at him. You destroyed his report. Trevor's eyes narrowed. You saw that? I saw it in your trash. He lowered his voice. Be careful, Rachel. She looked at the cabinet. The metal surface seemed almost to breathe beneath the fluorescent lights. At 2:17 p.m., a connection inside the secondary distribution unit fractured. The arc lasted less than half a second, but it sent a surge into the control bus. The primary processing system transferred its load to the backup array exactly as designed. Then the automatic restart sequence activated, just as Marcus had warned. At first, nothing appeared wrong. The monitors stayed green. Transactions continued. Trevor relaxed. Then one screen flickered. A second followed. Across the room, warning messages began appearing. Clock synchronization error. Duplicate routing keys. Failover conflict. Rachel rushed to the main terminal. Trevor. What? We have 2 arrays identifying themselves as primary. Restart the controller. No, do it. That's what Marcus said not to do. Trevor reached across her and entered the restart command himself. For 1 second, every screen went white, then black. The sound that followed was not an explosion. It was quieter, a soft descending hum as thousands of machines lost coordination. Throughout the building, phones began ringing. In New York, a hospital network tried to purchase emergency blood supplies and received an authorization failure. In Ohio, a manufacturing company's payroll transfer disappeared between 2 accounts. In London, an airline could not release funds for fuel. In Singapore, a bank froze 6,000 customer transactions. Within 4 minutes, Whitmore Global had lost control of its payment network. Within 9 minutes, Richard Whitmore was running toward the operations floor. What happened? Trevor stood before the dark monitors. We're investigating. Turn it back on. We can't yet. Richard grabbed his arm. What do you mean you can't? The systems are out of synchronization. Richard looked toward Rachel. Fix it. She was pale. If we force the network online, it could send duplicate payment instructions. How long? I don't know. Richard's face tightened. Give me a number. I don't have one. The main doors opened. Lawyers, compliance officers, and division heads poured into the room. A vice president raised his phone. The Federal Reserve wants an explanation. Tell them we are conducting maintenance, Richard said. They already know it's an outage. Another executive spoke. 3 major clients are threatening to terminate their contracts. Then stop them. How? Richard turned on him. That is what I pay you for. The room filled with voices. Servers hummed. Phones vibrated against desks. On the far wall, the company's global transaction map had become a field of gray dots. Richard stared at it. Then he noticed the warm cabinet. He walked toward it. The faint smell of burned insulation touched the air. His face changed. Rachel saw it. He warned us, she said. Richard did not respond. Trevor stepped between them. This is not connected to what the janitor said. Rachel turned. It is exactly what he said. You don't know that. He told us the control bus would short. He told us not to restart automatically. Richard looked at Trevor. Did he file a report? Trevor said nothing. Did he? There was an informal note. Where is it? Trevor swallowed. I considered it unreliable. Richard's voice became dangerously quiet. Where is the report? Trevor looked down. I discarded it. The noise of the room seemed to retreat. Richard stared at him. Then Rachel opened her tablet. I photographed it. Trevor's head snapped toward her. She brought up the image. Marcus's handwriting filled the screen. Intermittent electrical resonance. Localized heat. Uneven secondary load. Risk of control bus damage. Do not initiate automatic failover restart until physical isolation is confirmed. At the bottom was his signature. Marcus Reed. Richard read it twice. His hand loosened around his phone. How did he know? Rachel looked at him. He worked in industrial electrical systems for 23 years. Richard raised his eyes. You knew? I found out yesterday. And no one told me. He tried to tell you himself. The memory returned with brutal clarity. You clean floors. You do not touch equipment worth more than your entire bloodline will ever earn. Richard felt something cold move through his chest. But there was no time for shame. Not yet. How do we reach him? Human Resources searched the employee database. The phone number on file had been disconnected 2 years earlier. The address was old. Luis Ortega stood near the back of the room. I know where he lives. Every executive turned toward him. Richard recognized the plumbing technician only vaguely. Take me there. Luis folded his arms. Why? Richard stared at him. Because the company is collapsing. That wasn't my question. The room fell quiet. Luis's voice remained calm. Why should Marcus help you? Richard looked toward the dead monitors. He had spent 40 years believing money could answer every question. Now the one man he needed had left with a cardboard box and $10 fewer than he could afford because he had seen someone colder than himself sleeping in the rain. Richard lowered his voice. Because people could lose everything. Luis studied him. That might matter to Marcus. An hour later, Richard's limousine stopped outside a narrow brick building on the south side. Rainwater gathered along the curb. A laundromat glowed beneath the apartment windows, washing machines turning behind fogged glass. Richard stepped from the car. No cameras. No assistants. Only Luis accompanied him. They climbed 3 flights of stairs. The hallway smelled of boiled vegetables, old carpet, and warm detergent. Luis knocked. Lena opened the door. She wore blue medical scrubs and held a textbook against her chest. Her eyes moved from Luis to Richard. She recognized him immediately. No, she began closing the door. Richard placed one hand against it. Please. Lena's expression hardened. You fired my father in front of hundreds of people. I know. You called him ignorant. I know. You insulted his family. Richard lowered his hand. I know. Marcus appeared behind her. He had changed into a dark sweater. Evelyn's photograph sat on a small table beside him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Richard looked at the apartment. The peeling paint. The narrow kitchen. The stack of tuition bills beneath a coffee mug. He thought of his own office, where a single painting had cost more than this entire building. Mr. Reed, he said. Marcus's face remained still. Mr. Whitmore. The system failed. I'm sorry to hear that. You were right. Marcus glanced at Luis. How bad? Complete network outage. Did they trigger automatic restart? Richard looked down. Yes. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Then you may have corrupted the transaction ledger. We did. Lena looked at her father. You don't owe them anything. Marcus did not answer. Richard stepped forward. Banks are freezing transfers. Hospitals cannot access funds. Thousands of businesses may miss payroll. Marcus's eyes sharpened. Any duplicates released? Not yet. External settlement links? Disconnected. Good. Richard's voice cracked slightly. Can you help us? Marcus looked at the man who had humiliated him. He saw no cameras behind Richard. No public relations team. No board members waiting to applaud a performance. Only fear. Real fear. Richard Whitmore was not afraid of losing money. He was afraid of being responsible for millions of ordinary people waking to find their lives disrupted. For the first time, the billionaire understood that the system he called an empire was not made of data. It was made of rent payments, medicine, wages, food. Marcus looked toward Lena. She shook her head slowly. He understood her anger. He shared it. But he also remembered Evelyn's final words. Do not let this world make you smaller. He picked up his old tool bag. I'm not coming back for you, Marcus said. Richard nodded. I understand. I'm coming back for everyone depending on that network. I understand. Marcus put on his coat. Lena's eyes filled, not with disappointment, but fear. What if they blame you? Marcus touched her cheek. Then I'll still know why I went. The limousine moved through rain-darkened streets toward downtown. Marcus sat in the back beside Richard. Between them was more than silence. It was the distance between two Americas that had occupied the same building for 4 years without ever meeting. Richard looked at Marcus's hands. The skin was rough. A pale scar crossed one thumb. You really worked as a technician? Marcus watched the city pass outside. Yes. Why didn't you put it on your application? I did. Richard turned toward him. Marcus continued. Human Resources said the position didn't require technical experience. Richard looked away. Streetlights slid across the window. After a while, he said, what I said to you was unforgivable. Marcus did not respond. I was angry. You were comfortable. Richard looked at him. Marcus's voice remained quiet. Anger makes people reckless. Comfort tells them who they are allowed to be reckless with. The words settled between them. Richard lowered his eyes. At the headquarters, the lobby was no longer polished and calm. Employees rushed between elevators. News vans lined the street. Security guards held back reporters. When Marcus entered, conversation stopped. People recognized the gray-haired janitor who had been escorted out hours earlier. This time, Richard walked beside him. Not ahead. Inside the operations center, Rachel met Marcus near the failed cabinet. I'm sorry, she said. You tried. Not hard enough. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then try harder next time. He set down his tool bag. The room gathered around him. Engineers, executives, and consultants who had once ignored him now waited for instructions. Marcus pointed toward the main power schematic. Show me the physical isolation map. Trevor folded his arms. We already checked the distribution units. Marcus did not look at him. Then check them again. Trevor's face flushed. Richard stepped forward. Do what he says. Rachel displayed the map. Marcus studied it. The damaged bus created 2 competing timing references. Your transaction ledger isn't necessarily lost. It may be split. One engineer frowned. We've never seen a split at this layer. Marcus looked at him. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. He asked for raw current logs, offline ledger copies, and the precise time of the first ARC team scattered. For the next 2 hours, Marcus worked without raising his voice. He found that the system had created 2 parallel transaction histories separated by 74 milliseconds. One ledger contained legitimate transfers. The other contained incomplete duplicate instructions generated during the failed restart. The company's recovery software could not determine which version was valid because both carried authentic internal signatures. Rachel stared at the data. How do we separate them? Marcus pointed to a tiny timing variation. The damaged power line distorted the clock's signal before the second ledger formed. It's less than a microsecond. That's enough. He explained that every false transaction carried a fractional timing drift linked to the unstable electrical pulse. The software saw the signatures as valid. But the physical irregularity had left a fingerprint. An engineer began writing a filter. Marcus stopped him. Don't remove anything yet. Quarantine it. Why? because some real transactions may have crossed during the split. He organized 3 verification teams. One compared external bank acknowledgments. Another mapped the timing drift. A third reconstructed the original sequence from offline nodes in Denver and Toronto. Richard stood at the edge of the room. For once, he did not command. He watched. Marcus spoke to junior engineers with the same respect he gave senior directors. When someone made a mistake, he corrected the process, not the person. When Rachel found a usable synchronization point, he credited her in front of the room. No one was afraid to tell him bad news. And because no one was afraid, they found the truth faster. At 1:40 a.m., the verified ledger was ready. A young engineer named Daniel looked at Marcus. "We can restore the network." Marcus studied the final checks. Not all at once. Richard stepped forward. "How long will staged restoration take?" 40 minutes. "We've already been offline almost 12 hours. Marcus looked at him. "If you want fast," asked Trevor. The room went still. Trevor looked down. Richard nodded. 40 minutes. They restored hospitals first, then payroll processors, then emergency government accounts. At 2:03 a.m., a hospital in New York successfully purchased blood supplies. At 2:11, the Ohio Manufacturing Company recovered its payroll. At 2:29, international banking links reopened. One by one, gray dots on the global map turned green. No one cheered at first. They were too tired, too afraid to believe it. Then Rachel received confirmation that the final ledger matched all external settlement records. "We're clear," she whispered. Daniel looked at her. "What?" She lifted her voice. "We're clear. No duplicated funds. No permanent losses." The operations room erupted. Engineers hugged. Someone cried. A young analyst sat on the floor and covered his face with both hands. Richard did not move. He looked at Marcus standing beneath the screens. The same man he had ordered security to remove. The same hands he had called filthy had just protected the livelihoods of millions of people. Marcus closed his tool bag. Richard walked toward him. Every eye followed. "Mr. Reed." Marcus turned. Richard's voice carried across the room. "I owe you an apology." Marcus said nothing. Richard swallowed. "I treated your uniform as proof of your limits. I assumed your position told me your worth. And when you tried to protect this company, I humiliated you because listening would have required me to admit someone beneath me knew something I did not." The room was silent. Richard looked at the employees gathered around them. "What I said was cruel. It was arrogant. And it was wrong." Trevor shifted near the wall. Richard continued. "Marcus Reed saved this company tonight. But more importantly, he protected every person who depended on us, even after I gave him every reason to walk away." He turned back to Marcus. "I am sorry." No cameras recorded the apology. No investors applauded. Only exhausted employees stood beneath the cold blue light, watching a powerful man finally speak without armor. Richard extended his hand. Marcus looked at it. For a moment, the room held its breath. Then Marcus shook it, not as surrender, not as forgiveness completed, as acknowledgement that change had to begin somewhere. Richard's eyes glistened. "I want to offer you any position you choose." Marcus released his hand. "You still think this is about a title?" Richard's face fell. Marcus looked around the room. Rachel tried to investigate. She was threatened. The technicians saw warning signs but were afraid to slow down a presentation. Your system failed because people were punished for speaking and rewarded for pretending. Richard listened. "You don't need one hero," Marcus said. "You need a company where the next person who sees danger doesn't have to become one." The words struck deeper than anger could have. Richard turned toward Trevor. The infrastructure director's face had gone white. "You destroyed a safety report," Richard said. Trevor straightened. "I was protecting the company from unnecessary disruption. You were protecting yourself." "I followed performance expectations." Richard looked around the room. "Expectations I created." Trevor opened his mouth. Richard raised one hand. "You were suspended pending an independent investigation." Security approached. Trevor looked at Marcus. There was resentment in his eyes, but also something weaker. Fear. Marcus did not smile. He did not need to. By sunrise, the city had turned pale beyond the glass walls. Rain clouds separated over Lake Michigan, and thin gold light entered the operations center. Most employees had gone home. Marcus stood alone near the window, holding a paper cup of coffee. Richard joined him. For a while, neither spoke. Below them, buses moved through the streets. Restaurant workers unlocked doors. Nurses ended overnight shifts. Delivery drivers carried boxes into buildings. All the ordinary people whose money had passed through the network without them ever knowing Marcus Reed's name. Richard leaned against the window. My father started with nothing, he said. He cleaned train cars. Marcus looked at him. He used to come home smelling like oil and metal. I hated it. Kids at school laughed at his clothes. Richard's mouth tightened. I told myself I would become powerful enough that no one could ever look down on us again. And then, Richard stared at his reflection. I became the person looking down. Marcus took a slow drink of coffee. Recognition did not erase harm, but it opened a door punishment alone could not. What happens now? Richard asked. Marcus looked toward the waking city. You decide whether tonight embarrassed you or changed you. 3 weeks later, Whitmore Global announced an independent review of its leadership and safety culture. Trevor Kane was dismissed after investigators confirmed he had ignored multiple maintenance warnings and manipulated infrastructure reports to meet cost targets. The board established a protected reporting system allowing any employee, regardless of rank, to raise technical or ethical concerns without retaliation. Rachel Kim became Director of Infrastructure Reliability. Her first decision was to require physical inspections alongside automated monitoring. Her second was to place a framed copy of Marcus's discarded warning report inside the operations center. Not as decoration. As a reminder, Richard invited Marcus to return as Vice President of Systems Resilience. Marcus declined. He also declined a luxury car, a large office, and a public ceremony. Instead, he proposed something else. Whitmore Global would fund a paid technical training program for custodians, security guards, cafeteria workers, and other employees who possessed skills the company had never bothered to see. Participants could earn certifications while continuing to receive full wages. Formerly overlooked workers would be allowed to apply for internal positions without degree barriers when they could demonstrate competence. Richard accepted every condition. Marcus agreed to lead the program. His new office was on the 38th floor, but he kept his old janitor's name badge in the top drawer of his desk. 6 months later, the first training class graduated. Luis earned a building systems certification after 30 years of being called only when pipes broke. A cafeteria worker named Aisha completed cybersecurity training and joined the fraud detection department. A night security guard who had studied programming online became a junior software engineer. Marcus stood at the back of the graduation room while families applauded. Lena sat in the front row. She had passed her nursing exams. When Marcus's name was announced, she stood first. Richard stood beside her. He no longer introduced Marcus as the man who saved his company. He introduced him as the man who taught the company how many people it had failed to recognize. After the ceremony, Richard found Marcus in the empty operations center. Evening lights stretched across the floor. The servers hummed with a steady, balanced rhythm. Richard held something in his hand. It was the small plant from Marcus's old locker. The broken leaf had been trimmed. New growth had appeared near the stem. I found it in storage, Richard said. Marcus took the pot carefully. Thank you. Richard looked toward the cabinet where the failure had begun. We replaced the entire distribution system. I know. The new sensors measure raw transients. I know. Richard smiled slightly. Rachel tells me you still check it by listening. Marcus looked at the rows of machines. Sensors tell you what they were built to notice. And listening. Listening tells you when something wants to be noticed. Richard nodded. No more words were needed. Marcus carried the plant toward his office. As he passed the glass wall, he noticed a custodian polishing fingerprints from the door. She was young, perhaps 19, with headphones hanging around her neck and a mathematics textbook resting on her cart. Marcus stopped. What are you studying? She looked up, startled. Applied mathematics. Do you like it? Her face brightened. Yes, sir. Marcus glanced at the book. We have a data analysis training program starting next month. She stared at him. For employees? For people. The young woman looked down at her uniform, then back at Marcus. You think I could apply? Marcus opened the glass door. I think you should never wait for someone else to decide what you are capable of. She slowly smiled. Marcus continued down the hallway. Behind the windows, the sun sank between Chicago's towers, turning steel and glass the color of warm copper. On the operations floor, executives and custodians crossed the same light. No one applauded. No music played. The servers continued their quiet rhythm. The building still stood where it always had. But inside it, people had begun to see one another. Marcus placed the small plant beside his office window. Its newest leaf leaned toward the last strip of sunlight. He touched the edge of it once. Then he stepped back. Outside, evening settled over the city. Inside, the machines breathed evenly. And in the glass, the old janitor's badge caught the fading light.